once again we are at live cricket for this edition. It's episode 23 of the CRICKETher weekly podcast, and in our background here we are at Hursley Park Cricket Club in Hampshire, and they are playing Cove Cricket Club. So there's a few things to talk about this week, Sid. Exciting. First up, we've had the conclusion of the first domestic competition of the 2020 season, which was the London Championship, organised independently of the ECB, pretty much. And Surrey have triumphed in that. So the final match was going to be Middlesex against Kent at Mill Hill School on Wednesday, but it unfortunately fell foul of the rain. So that meant that Surrey triumphed with a particular number of points that I don't really remember because we didn't ever really get a list of the regulations. But hey, well done to Surrey. Obviously, they also had won the one-off London Cup match against Middlesex earlier in this season, so they're having a pretty good few weeks, aren't they, Sid?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of almost come a year too late for Surrey in terms of the fact that county cricket's now no longer the premier form of cricket that the girls are playing. We've got regionals that are slotting in above that. But what's really great about this story is that sort of 4 or 5 years ago, Surrey obviously took a decision to invest in lots of young players. So when they appointed a new captain, Hannah Jones, and we've got the likes of Eva Gray and Rihanna Southby, Amy Gordon, and those players have become the backbone of the team, and they've grown over the years and they've got better, and they're now at a standard where they're one of the best county teams in the country. So that's really great for them to have achieved that.
Absolutely, and you'd think that if we did have a full Women's County Championship this year, they might have gone on and triumphed in Division 1, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously the equivalent of that now, the kind of premier domestic competition is going to be the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy for this season, and the regional competition, whatever it becomes known as going forward. So potentially, does that investment in young players really benefit Surrey, do you think, in terms of the regional stuff?
Yeah, well, hopefully it does. I mean, hopefully the counties like Surrey will continue to invest in their players in the hope that the success of the players in regionals, even if they're not directly tied to the club. I mean, the South East Stars is called the South East Stars. It's not the Surrey Stars anymore. But hopefully they'll continue to invest and continue to bring players through, because it's really great when you see players and you think that I've seen these players come on for the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and now they're winning matches and they've really made progress and come on. So that's great.
Yeah, and it does certainly look like that Stars team, of which a core component will be those Surrey players who you were just talking about, the Hannah Joneses, the Eva Grays, the Rihanna Southbys. We actually watched a warm-up match against them. We actually watched a warm-up match, and it was the Stars against the Vipers yesterday, and it was live streamed from Hove, so it was great to be able to watch that. And the Stars won, so that probably puts them as potentially the front runners in this forthcoming Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy. Just putting it out there. I did get a little bit of comeback on Twitter yesterday after I tweeted that.
Well, it's a big call, and in theory this should be a very even competition, but it does look like things have fallen very well for Surrey. They've been able to take the core of that Surrey team, which they've been building, as I said, for 4 or 5 years, and then add in a smattering of the best Kent players, and they're currently looking very strong. And you'd have to say they were favourites for the South Group, wouldn't you, Raf?
Yeah, you probably would have to say that. We have had a few more squad announcements this week, haven't we? And I think so. We've had the Thunder now. We'd obviously had the Vipers last week. We've had the Stars in the last few days. I think the Sunrisers are gradually leaking theirs out over the previous and the next few days. They're obviously another team in the South Group who are looking strong. I guess they've probably got a couple of factors in their favour in terms of Trevor Griffin as the coach, who won the KSL twice. He's obviously a really well-respected coach and kind of knows women's cricket inside out, so he's got a little bit more of a sense than perhaps others might have of kind of what's happening in the domestic structure. And the other kind of big core component of the Sunrisers team, I guess, is probably going to be somebody like Cordelia Griffith, who is having a really great start to her professional career, isn't she? I know that we were talking about this the other day at Guildford when it was Surrey against Middlesex, and she just seems to be kind of carrying herself in a particular way that suggests that she's really sort of grabbing this opportunity to be a professional that she maybe thought that she wasn't going to have with both hands, and she's kind of got that sort of comportment as a professional, and she's definitely kind of batting like it. So I guess another potential strong team in the southern group will be the Sunrisers, although we haven't seen an entirely full squad yet. What about the north group, Sid? How's that looking?
Well, we've seen all of the squads except the Central Sparks, although we can kind of deduce most of the members of the Central Sparks squad by the process of elimination now, if I can say that right. And I think the Central Sparks are probably going to be the favourites in the northern group. We've got a very young Loughborough side, that are going to be looking to build over the next few years, and that Loughborough side could indeed do what we've just talked about Surrey doing. They could be the side to back in 4 or 5 years time if you can get your bookie to give you some very long odds there. And we've got Lancashire's, or rather, we've got the Thunder Cricket side, who have got a very strong Lancashire core, and the Yorkshire Diamonds, or the Northern Diamonds. Is that right?
Diamonds.
But I think that the Central Sparks are probably going to be the side to beat in the northern group. They probably won't thank me for calling them Northerners, but
we didn't decide on the groups. That was the ECB. It's always the Midlands who loses out in these regional competitions, isn't it? But hey, okay. Well, that's the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy. The other thing related to that isn't yet clear is whether the England players are potentially going to be released to play in it, which could make all the difference in terms of. Which I hope that it does the freeze frame on YouTube of you doing that. Obviously, whether the England players can come in and how they're allocated could make all the difference, because we don't yet know who might end up playing for which region. So that could tilt the balance a bit, couldn't it, Sis?
Yeah, it definitely could. Obviously, there's a couple of England players free to be allocated to some franchises, a couple to other franchises, if that happens. But what is the status of that at the moment, Raf? Where are we at with the possibility of England playing, Iceland or... anyone else that we can muster up? Germany, Austria, Hungary, if that does that still exist?
I don't think so. So you're a historian, you're meant to know these things. Anyway, yes. So I think the state of play at the moment, or the state of not play, as it happens, is that I believe Claire Connor was meant to be having a phone conversation or potentially a Zoom conversation with somebody from the West Indies Cricket Board on Friday. We don't know yet what the outcome of that was, but you'd have to say that it's going to be announced in the next few days whether or not England end up playing any internationals. And the reason I say that is because really, if England are going to play some internationals, then we need to know that before the regional competition starts, because if they aren't going to play, then they will need to be released to play for their regions. You can't have the England players let loose on the regional trophy competition halfway through when the competition's already started, because that kind of probably undermines the integrity of the whole thing. So really we're expecting an announcement about that any day now, and it may be that England are playing the West Indies. We know that Ireland have stuck their hand up and said they wouldn't mind playing. That would be a great opportunity for them, but who knows what the ECB's reaction to that will be. It's possible they might just go, okay, well we'll send the England players out to play for the regions, but if that's the case, as I say, they kind of need to crack on with it a bit, don't they?
Mm-hmm. So and then also this week we've had some gossip in the Daily Mail about the 100, haven't we, Raf? What's that all about?
Well, there was a piece suggesting that the ECB are looking at cost-cutting measures as a result of the pandemic, and it suggested that one of the things that's being considered is more double-header matches, and that means that the women won't be playing at some of the kind of more outground venues that they plan to play at. So places like Sedbergh School, for example, a little bit in the middle of nowhere, a little bit off the beaten track. So the suggestion is that one of the things that's being considered is that the women play their matches at the main ground kind of before the men's matches, as is the traditional way with double headers. Now, we did speak to somebody at the ECB who actually said that there's nothing definite yet, that's just one possible option that's being mooted. So we should stress that it's still a little bit up in the air. We don't know whether it will happen or not, but what do you think, Sid? More double headers in the 100, is it a good idea?
Not massively keen, to be honest. I think that always, means that the women's matches end up being a warm-up match played in front of very few spectators. But also any spectators that get to watch the women's match have to be people that have paid for the men's match. I know that those men's matches tickets are supposed to be reasonably priced for the 100, but what you're asking families to do then potentially is a family to come at 10 in the morning and watch a women's game and then maybe have a 2-hour break before they watch the men's game, because as we know, one of the issues with this is that the men, the superstars in the men, insist on being able to come into the ground 2 hours beforehand and have use of the changing room and be able to relax and have a massage and all that stuff that your global superstars that are going to be the backbone of the 100 in terms of getting people through the door are going to demand. And the men aren't going to be happy, unfortunately, if that turnaround is too quick. So it does make things difficult. But on the other hand, if this is the only option to get the women's competition played, if you're saying, well, we need to find ways of saving money, and this does save money, and I'm kind of slightly sceptical about whether it really does save money actually, because you've still got to keep a ground open for another 4 hours, and these are more expensive grounds to keep. It's much more expensive to keep Lord's open than it is to keep Essex open, for example. So I'm not really totally convinced about that, but we'll see if it has to happen. And I appreciate that the ECB do need to cut costs somewhere probably. We'll see. And finally this week, Raf, we've got a new issue of the Women's Crick Zone magazine come out. Well, we haven't. Women's Crick Zone have got a new issue of the Women's Crick Zone magazine. If you're in India, do try and pick up a copy. They're beautifully presented. We've seen the paper copies. We've got sent paper copies of the first two, and they're really lovely things with beautiful artwork and just really nicely done. If you're in the UK or Australia or anywhere else, get out your iPad and you can download it as a PDF, and you can read all the great articles in there. There's a great piece by Adam Collins with Beth Mooney, and a great piece by someone called Raf Nicholson. Raf, what was your piece all about?
That's very kind, thank you. I don't normally like to blow my own trumpet, but I do think it's probably one of the best things I've written, partly because it's quite an important piece. It was it's talking about kind of gay female cricketers and the importance of the move recently towards women cricketers in England particularly feeling able to actually be open about their personal relationships in a way that, as my kind of historical research has shown, they've never been able to do before, and that actually there's kind of been a lot of discomfort around that, and I was fortunate enough to actually do an interview with Lauren Winfield, who's been through that process of that kind of struggle with coming to terms with her own sexuality, and coming to terms with talking about her relationship status publicly, and actually recently got married and was very happy to tell the world about it, and I thought that she was very brave and very eloquent in the way that she spoke to me, and she really totally made that piece. So it wasn't really very much about me in the end. It's much more about her and some of the other players who are mentioned in it, but it is a good read, I think, if I may say so. So yeah, I would urge you to get reading if you haven't already.
Lovely stuff. Well, thank you very much for joining us again this week. We'll be back next week, somewhere or other. Until then, look after yourselves and stay safe. Goodbye.